The candles at the Aldermere Assembly had been lit an hour, and already Hesper Whitgrove had learned the exact shape of not being seen. It was a particular thing. It had corners and a temperature. She stood a little behind the Dowager Duchess of Kelvinridge's chair near the cold draught of the passage door, holding a spare shawl of grey Norwich wool that smelled faintly of lavender and old cedar. The room was full. 200 people, perhaps. The music went up, and the music came down. Feet moved on the chalked floor. And in all of it, through the whole first hour, not one pair of eyes had found her face and stayed. She had counted. It was a bad habit, the counting. One glance from a passing footman, who wanted to know if the old Duchess required anything. One from a matron who mistook her for a lady's maid and looked away, satisfied. That was all. 2 glances in an hour, and neither had been for her. She did not mind it as much as she once had. That frightened her a little when she thought of it. Beside her, the Dowager sat very straight, a small ancient woman in violet grey silk, her rings loose on thin fingers, her ebony cane hooked over the chair arm. Tabitha, Dowager Duchess of Kelvinridge, was 81 years old and missed nothing. She watched the room the way a general watches a valley. "They are talking about him again," the old woman said, without turning her head. "You can always tell. The fans go up." Hesper followed her gaze. Near the fireplace, 3 young women had leaned their heads together, their painted fans lifted just enough to shield their mouths. One of them glanced toward the great doors, then back, then laughed behind the silk. "About the Duke," Hesper said quietly. "About my grandson." "Yes." The Dowager's mouth thinned. "They come to these rooms every season, hoping the silent Duke of Kelvinridge will forget himself and appear. He never does, so they invent him instead. It is easier to love a man who is only a rumour." 2 years, Hesper had been told. 2 years since Everett, 9th Duke of Kelvinridge, had last stood in a public room. 2 years since he had spoken more than a handful of words to anyone outside his own household. The county had settled the story to suit itself. He had gone mad with grief. He had been disfigured. He kept to a single locked wing and let the great house rot around him. None of it was true. Hesper had lived at Fenknoll for 2 years, and she knew the house did not rot. She had never once seen the Duke's face. "They say he has not spoken since his brother died," she said. "They say a great many things." The Dowager's fingers closed on the cane. "He speaks. He speaks to me when he chooses. He speaks to his steward about drains and timber. He simply stopped saying anything that costs him." She was quiet a moment. Kit was the one who talked. My younger grandson. He talked enough for the pair of them. When he went, the talking went out of that house like water out of a cracked jug. Hesper said nothing. She had learned that the Dowager's grief, like her own, preferred silence to sympathy. The music changed. A country dance formed up, 2 long lines, and the young woman by the fireplace stepped into the top of the set. She was beautiful in the way that made rooms rearrange themselves. Tall, fair, a column of pale rose sarsenet, her chin lifted as though she were already somewhere better. Every head near the fire turned to follow her. "Lady Genevieve," the Dowager murmured, and there was a whole history folded into the 2 words. "My late daughter's girl, Brackworth's eldest. She has been practicing to be Duchess of Kelvinridge since she was 16. A dry sound, not quite a laugh. She dances very well. It has done her no good at all. Hesper watched Lady Genevieve turn down the line, radiant, certain, and she felt the old, useless ache of comparison and set it down again where it belonged. She was 22. She had one good gown, died twice. Her father had been a clever, gentle, disastrous man who studied beetles and forgot rent. And when he died, he left her £400 in the keeping of a guardian who did not like her. She had learned Latin and the names of plants and how to make a shilling last. None of it was the sort of thing a room like this could see. "You are brooding?" the dowager said. "I can hear it." "I am holding your shawl, Your Grace." "You are holding my shawl and brooding. The two are not exclusive." The old woman turned then, and her sharp, pale eyes, so like the portraits in the Fenknoll gallery, fixed on Hesper's face. "You dislike these rooms." "I have no place in them." "That is different from disliking them." "Is it?" "A little." Hesper adjusted the shawl over her arm. "I don't mind not being seen. I mind pretending I expect to be." The dowager looked at her a long moment. Something moved in the seamed old face, quick and warm and gone. "Yes," she said. "You are wasted carrying my things, Hesper Whitgrove. I have thought so for a year. I am beginning to think I shall have to do something about it." Hesper did not ask what she meant. She had learned that too. When the dowager wished you to know a thing, she told you, and not 1 hour before. They stayed another 40 minutes. The dowager took a single glass of negus and refused the supper. At 11:30, her cane came off the chair arm, and Hesper fetched the carriage, and they went out into the cold October dark. 2 women no one had come to see. The ride home was 8 miles of black lanes. The dowager slept, or pretended to. Hesper watched the hedgerows go by and thought, without wanting to, of the letter that had come 3 days ago and sat now in the bottom of her work-box like a stone. It was from her guardian, Mr. Josiah Pell of Gay Street, Bath. He had married her mother's sister. Along with a middling attorney's practice, he had inherited the management of Hesper's small fortune. He held, too, the disposal of her person, until she should turn 25, or marry with his approval. The letter had been brief. Mr. Pell wrote that he had found her a situation more suitable than genteel service. He wrote that a gentleman of substance had been so good as to express an interest. He wrote that she should hold herself ready to return to Bath before Christmas, and that he trusted she would show on this occasion a proper sense of what was owed to those who had sheltered her. The gentleman of substance was named Mr. Rufus Croom. Hesper had met him once, 3 years past, before the dowager had ever plucked her out of that cold house on Gay Street. Mr. Croom was a moneylender and a wine merchant, and a man who cleaned his nails at the table with the point of his knife. He was 50. He laughed at his own remarks, and watched to see that you laughed too. He had put his hand flat on the small of her back once, in a doorway, and left it there 3 seconds too long, and smiled at her while he did it. Mr. Pell did not want Croom's money. Pell wanted Croom's connections, the aldermen and the contracts, and the invitations that came with a rich, vulgar man's friendship. Hesper was the coin he meant to pay for them. She had told no one, not even the dowager. She had turned it over and over, and found no door in it. She was of age, yes, but her £400 sat in Pell's hands until he released it, and he would release it only into a marriage he chose. Refuse, and she had the clothes on her back, and 2 years' kindness she could not presume upon forever. The dowager was 81. When she died, Fencknoll would pass to a silent man who did not know Hesper's name. And Hesper would be a stranger under his roof, with nowhere on earth to go. She had £400 she could not touch, and one gown, and a great deal of Latin. The carriage turned in at the Fencknoll gates. A little before 1, she helped the dowager to her room, and to her maid, and then she climbed the back stair to her own small chamber under the eaves, and she did not sleep. She lay and listened to the house. Old timber ticking. A dog somewhere, once. And far off, on the west side, the sound she had learned to know, without ever having a face to fix to it. A single window shutter, opening. The Duke did not sleep either. She had worked that out months ago. Whatever he did in the small hours behind his glass, he did it awake. She rose before it was light. She always did. The kitchen fire was banked but living. Mrs. Sturge, the housekeeper, would not be down for an hour. Hesper cut herself a heel of yesterday's bread, took the tin scoop from its nail, and let herself out through the scullery door into the cold. Dawn at Fencknoll came grey and slow off the Shropshire hills, over a mere the colour of pewter, and a park gone tawny with the year. The air smelled of frost and wood smoke, and faintly of the pigsty away east. Hesper crossed the wet cobbles of the lower yard with the scoop under her arm, her breath a small cloud in front of her, and the hens heard her before they saw her, and began their soft complaint. The poultry yard sat in an angle of the old kitchen wing, a square of trodden earth and one leaning apple tree, walled on 2 sides, open on the third to the paddock and the mere beyond. When Hesper had come to Fencknoll 2 years before, it had been a ruin. A dozen ragged fowl running wild, half of them lost to the fox each winter, the coop fallen, the water green. No one had touched it in years. It offended her, the waste of it. She had asked the dowager, and the dowager had looked at her strangely for a moment, and then said, "Do as you like with it. No one will stop you." So she had. She had mended the coop with her own hands, and Thomas the gardener's help. She had culled and bought and bred until the flock was 30 strong, and paid its way in eggs. She had named none of them, because you did not name what you might have to kill, but she knew them all the same. The old speckled hen who bullied the others, the 2 bantams, the black cockerel with a torn comb who thought himself lord of the world. She scattered the first scoop wide, the way you did to stop the strong ones driving off the weak, and the yard filled with the low, glad racket of feeding. Frost smoked off the coop roof. Somewhere over the mere a heron went up on slow wings. The whole waking world was grey and rose and quiet. Hesper Whitgrove stood in the middle of it, in her old cloak, grain on her sleeve. For a few minutes each morning she was entirely, perfectly herself. It was enough. She did not, at first, look up at the window. She had learned not to. The window was on the west front, high, 3 floors up, at the corner where the old wing met the new. A study window, she had been told, though she had never been in that part of the house. For most of her first months, she had thought nothing of it. Then, one white morning in February, she had glanced up between one scoop and the next, and seen that the shutter was open, and that a man stood behind the glass, quite still, looking down. She had looked away at once. When she looked back, he was gone. It had happened again, and again. Not every day, but often, and always at this hour. Always the same tall, unmoving shape behind the cold glass, 3 floors up, watching a servant feed hens in a yard. She never saw his face clearly. The distance and the reflection saw to that. She saw only that he was there, and that he stayed, sometimes a minute, sometimes a quarter of an hour, and that he never once lifted a hand or gave any sign that he knew she knew. She had told no one. What was there to tell? The Duke looked out of his own window at his own yard. It was not a crime. And yet on the bad mornings, the mornings when the letter in her workbox sat heaviest, it was a strange, small comfort that, watching, someone in the world knew she was there, even if he was only a rumour with a face she'd never seen, even if he never said a word. This morning she looked up. The shutter was open. The tall shape stood behind the glass. She did not look away as quickly as usual. She stood with the scoop empty in her hand, the hens at her feet. For the length of 3 breaths, she looked back at the window. She looked at the man who watched her every day and had never once spoken to her. And she thought, in 2 months I will be married to Rufus Croom. No one will ever watch me feed anything again. Then she bent for the last of the grain, and when she straightened, the window was empty, and the day had begun. 3 floors up, in a room the maids were forbidden to enter before noon, Everett, 9th Duke of Kelvinridge, stepped back from the glass. He stood with one hand flat against the cold shutter. His heart was going far too hard for a man who had only been standing still. He did not entirely understand what he did at that window. He had stopped trying to. He knew when it had begun. A morning the winter before last, in the worst of it, when he had not slept and could not read, and the house had been a coffin with him alive inside it. He had gone to the window because a man must look somewhere. And there below, in the ruined yard, he had not been able to bring himself to have cleared. A young woman he did not know had been on her knees in the frost, mending his brother's coop. Kit's coop. Kit's yard. Kit's hens, or the wild descendants of them, that Everett had ordered left alone 2 years running, because to give the command to be rid of them was a thing his mouth would not make. And this stranger, this small dark companion his grandmother had brought into the house, was down there at first light with a hammer and a mouthful of nails, putting it back together as though it mattered. He had meant to have it stopped. He had gone so far as to ring for his steward. Then he had watched her a moment longer, and he had not rung, and he had put the command back inside himself, where all his commands now lived, unspoken. That had been 20 months ago. He had watched her nearly every morning since. He could have found out anything he liked about her. He was a duke. A word to Hobley his steward, a word to his grandmother, and he would have known her name, her history, her whole small circumstance by noon. He had asked nothing. He had wanted, obscurely, to keep her the one thing in his ruined days that owed nothing to his rank, and asked nothing of his grief. A woman feeding hens in a yard. Alive. Ordinary. Unbearably, steadyingly ordinary. He knew her hours better than he knew his own. He knew she scattered wide so the weak ones ate. He knew she talked to them, low, though he could not hear the words. He knew that on the worst mornings, the wet black ones, she came anyway. She had always come anyway. In 2 winters he had counted 4 days she had not appeared, and each of the 4 had been longer and greyer than it had any right to be, and he had despised himself for the fact. This morning she had looked up. She had looked up and not looked away, For 3 breaths, a woman in the yard had looked a duke full in the face, across 40 feet of frozen air. Everett had felt it in his chest, like a hand closing. There had been something in her face he had not seen there before. He had watched that face for 2 winters, and learned it as he learned weather. Contentment, he had thought, or something like the peace of a person who has made her small corner right. This morning it had not been peace. This morning, across the cold light, the woman in the yard had looked at his window like someone saying goodbye. Everett took his hand from the shutter. He went to the bell and stopped, as he always stopped. Then, for the first time in longer than he could easily measure, he did not put the impulse back inside himself. He rang. When Hobley came, careful and grey and long-suffering, the Duke was standing at the cold hearth with his back to the room. Hobley waited. He had learned to wait. His master's words, when they came slowly, as though brought up from a great depth. "The companion," the Duke said. "My grandmother's companion. The one who keeps the yard. Miss Whitgrove, Your Grace." Whitgrove. He had not known even that. 20 months, and he had not let himself know her name. "Whitgrove," the Duke said. The word felt strange and particular in his mouth. "Find out her situation. All of it. Today." He paused. Hobley waited again, because he could hear that there was more, and that it was costing something. And Hobley, quietly. "Yes, Your Grace." The steward bowed and went. Everett turned back to the window. The yard below was empty now, the hens scratching, the frost already lifting off the coop, where her hands had made it whole. He stood there a long time in the grey light, a silent man in a silent house, and he thought about the look on her face, and he was afraid. He had lost the last person he loved to a closed door, and a word he did not say. He had promised himself he would never again be undone by that particular cowardice. He had also promised himself he would never again care enough about anyone to be in danger of it. One of those promises he understood now, standing at Kit's window over Kit's yard. He was about to break. He did not yet know which. Hobley was thorough. By that evening, the Duke knew everything the woman in the yard had spent 20 months keeping ordinary. He knew she was Hesper Whitgrove, 22, only child of a Mr. Whitgrove of Somerset, a gentleman naturalist of small means and smaller sense, dead of a chill 4 years past. He knew there was a portion of £400 held by a guardian. He knew the guardian was one Josiah Pell, an attorney of Bath, married to the girl's aunt, a man Hobley's discreet inquiries described as respectable in the way of a locked strong-box. He knew that the Dowager Duchess had met the girl on a visit to Bath 2 years since. She had disliked Pell on sight. She had carried Hesper Whitgrove off to Fenknowle to be her companion, as one might carry off a book from a house that did not deserve it. And he knew, because Hobley had a cousin who kept the receiving office, that 3 letters had come from Bath to Miss Whitgrove in the last month. The girl had walked into the village herself to post no reply. The last thing Hobley told him. He told him reluctantly, standing in the study with his hat turning in his hands. "There is a talk in the servants' hall, Your Grace. I set no store by talk, but the dowager's woman had it from the girl's own manner, not from her mouth. Miss Whitgrove would not gossip of herself. It seems the guardian means to call her back to Bath before Christmas. To be married." Hobley hesitated. "To a Mr. Croom, a wine merchant." The dowager's woman was much distressed. She says the girl has gone very quiet. Everett stood at the window, with his back to the room, as he always stood, and the yard below was blue with dusk, and he found that his hands had closed at his sides. "Croom," he said. "A person of some wealth, Your Grace, and no character to speak of. That is the report. A wine merchant of 50, with money, and no character, and a guardian who wished to sell his ward for the connection." Everett knew the arithmetic of it without being told. He had lived inside that world all his life. He knew exactly what such a marriage would be. He knew how little the girl's own wishes would weigh in it. He knew what would happen to the particular quality he had watched in her face for 2 winters, once Mr. Rufus Croom had the ordering of her days. It would go out. That was what would happen. The way the talking had gone out of this house. "That will be all," he said. Hobley bowed and left him. Everett stood at the glass until the dusk was full and the yard was gone. Then he did a thing he had not done in the evening in 2 years. He left the study. He walked the length of the cold gallery, past the covered portraits and the shut doors, to his grandmother's rooms. He knocked, and he went in. The dowager was by her fire, with a book she was not reading. She looked up, and whatever was in her grandson's face made her set the book down at once and sit very still. "Everett." "Grandmother." He stood just inside the door. Speaking, even here, even to her, was like lifting something heavy with a long unused arm. "Your companion, Miss Whitgrove. What of her?" The old woman's voice had gone carefully level. "Is it true that her guardian means to marry her to a man called Croom?" For a moment the dowager said nothing. Then her thin hand closed on the arm of her chair, and Hesper, had she been there, would have known the gesture. "It is true," she said. "She has not told me. She is too proud and too afraid of trespassing on my kindness to tell me she is drowning. I had it as you had it, sideways." Her eyes, so like his own, searched his face. "I have been sitting here 3 days, Everett, trying to think of a way to stop it, and finding none. Pell has the law of it. He has her money, and her going, and her staying. And I am too old to fight an attorney in the courts before Christmas." Her mouth twisted. "I could take her away, hide her. It would ruin her name and change nothing. She would still be his to reclaim." "There is a way to put her beyond him," the Duke said. The dowager went quite still. "Is there?" "You know there is." He heard his own voice, low and even, and terrible in its steadiness. "A married woman is her husband's, not her guardian's. Pell can do nothing against a marriage already made, least of all against—" He stopped. "Least of all against a duke," his grandmother finished softly. She looked at him for a very long time. The fire cracked. "Everett, do you know what you are saying?" "Yes." "You have not spoken to that girl once in your life?" "No." "You have watched her from a window like a ghost for 2 years, and never once let her see your face by daylight?" "Yes," he said. "I know exactly what I am. You need not describe it to me." The old woman rose. It took her a moment, and her cane, and he did not offer his arm because he knew she would not want it now. She crossed to him and looked up into his face. And she was not gentle, because she had never been gentle, and because gentleness was not what he needed. "If you do this," she said, "you will do it properly, or you will not do it at all. You will not rescue her into another cage. You will go to her yourself, with your own mouth, not a note, not through me, not through that unfortunate Hobley. You will tell her the truth of what you are offering, and let her say no if she wishes to say no. She has had enough of men who dispose of her over her head. Her old fingers came up and gripped his sleeve hard. She is worth more than a rescue, Everett. If all you have for her is a rescue, leave her to me, and I will find some other way. Do you understand me?" "Yes," said the Duke. And for the first time in 2 years, standing in his grandmother's fire-lit room with his heart going like a boy's, Everett, Duke of Kelvinridge, felt something that was not grief. He did not have a name for it yet, but it had opened in him like the shutter opened each morning, and behind it was the whole cold, bright, dangerous world. He went to find her the next day. Not from a window. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. He found her in the poultry yard, of course. Where else? It was afternoon by the time his courage had done its slow work. A raw grey afternoon, the light already failing. She was on her knees by the coop with a splint of hazel and a length of twine, mending the run where something had tried the wire in the night. She heard the yard gate, and did not look up at once, expecting Thomas. Then she felt the difference in the quiet, the particular held stillness of it, and she raised her head, and the tall man from the window was standing 6 feet away with his hat in his hand. She knew him instantly, though she had never seen his face. She knew him the way you know a word you have only ever read, suddenly spoken. He was younger than the rumours, 30 perhaps, tall, spare, in dark plain clothes, auburn hair gone a little long, a lean, grave face that had once been careless and had forgotten how. His eyes were the grey of the mere behind him, that cold, clear sea grey. They were fixed on her with an intensity that had nothing of rudeness in it. It was the look of a man looking at the one thing in a dark room that is lit. Hesper got to her feet, grain on her sleeve, twine in her hand, her knees wet from the cold ground. A duke in front of her, and no one else in the world. "Your Grace," she said, and curtsied because one did. He did not speak. The silence stretched. She watched him try, watched something work in his throat, and understood, with a small shock, that the rumours had the shell of it right, even if they had the meat of it wrong. Words did not come easily to this man. They cost him. She had spent her life among people for whom words were cheap. She recognized the opposite when she saw it. "You are Miss Whitgrove," he said at last. "I am." "You keep the yard?" "I do. A beat. Your yard, Your Grace. I hope I have not presumed. Your grandmother gave me leave." "It was not being kept," he said, "before you." His grey eyes went past her to the mended coop, the fat, contented hens, the swept run, and something crossed his face that she could not read, something old and painful. "It is better kept now than it has ever been." "Thank you," she said, and meant it, and was surprised to find she meant it very much. He turned the hat in his hands. She waited. She had learned patience from an old woman and a flock of hens, and she gave it to him now, without knowing why she felt it was owed. "I have come to say a thing to you," the Duke said, "that I have no right to say, and that will seem to you either an insult or a madness. I ask you to hear it to the end before you decide which." He drew a breath. "Your guardian means to marry you to a man named Croom." The blood went out of her face. "How do you—" "It does not matter how. It is true." His voice was very level, very careful, each word set down like a stone across a ford. "You did not choose it. You cannot refuse it without losing your portion and your place. If you go back to Bath, you will be his, and I think you know as well as I do what manner of man he is." He paused. "I am offering you an alternative. I am offering to marry you myself." The yard was completely silent. Even the hens had gone still. Hesper stood with the twine in her hand and stared at him, and could not make the words mean anything. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "you do not know me." "No." "You have never spoken to me before this moment." "No." "Then why?" "Because a married woman is beyond her guardian," he said. "Because Pell cannot touch a duchess. Because you would be free of Croom the day it was done, past any recalling, and no attorney in England could undo it." He said it plainly, the whole cold machinery of it laid open, hiding nothing. "That is what I am offering. Protection. A name he cannot reach past. I am not offering you." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I am not a whole man, Miss Whitgrove. I will not pretend to you that I am. I keep to my rooms. I do not go into the world. I have not been good company to anyone living in 2 years, and I do not know that I can learn to be again. I am offering you a wall to stand behind. Not more than that. I would not insult you by promising more than that." She should have laughed. It should have been absurd. A stranger, a duke, a proposal made across a poultry run to a woman with grain on her sleeve. It was not absurd. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in 4 years. "Why me?" she said. "You could offer that wall to anyone. Half the county would take it and thank God. Why the woman who feeds your hens?" For the first time, the level voice faltered. He looked at her, and then he looked away, at the window 3 floors above them, and back. "Because I have watched you come to this yard every morning for 2 years," he said, very low, "in the frost and the rain and the black cold. And you have always come. You have always come anyway. I do not know how to say what that has been to me. I am not able to say it. But I will not stand at that glass and watch that man take it out of you. I find I cannot. That is my reason. It is not a good one, and it is not a gallant one, and it is the true one." Hesper Whitgrove stood in the failing light and felt something turn over in her chest that she had thought was too small and too tired to turn over ever again. "I will not decide this in a yard," she said, because she had to say something, and because it was true, and because her heart was going far too hard for a woman only standing still. "No," he agreed at once. "Of course not. Take what time you need. I only ask—" He stopped. "I ask that you not let pride answer for you. You have a great deal of it. I have watched that too." Something that was almost, not quite, the ghost of a smile touched the grave mouth and vanished. "Do not refuse me only because it is proud to refuse me. Refuse me because you have looked at it whole. That is all I ask." He bowed then, a proper bow, deep and grave, to a woman with wet knees in a poultry yard. And he put his hat on his head, and he walked back through the gate into his silent house, and left her standing among the hens, with the whole grey world rearranged around her. She did not sleep that night either. She sat at her small window under the eaves with a shawl round her shoulders, and thought until her head ached. She was not a fool, and she did not let herself be one now. She laid it out cold, the way her father had never once laid anything out. On one side, Croom, a certainty, a slow smothering. 50 years old, a hand on the small of her back, a laugh you were required to echo. Her portion swallowed, her days ordered, whatever was still alive in her, put quietly out like the talking in this house. That was the road if she did nothing. There was no version of doing nothing that did not end in that doorway with that hand. On the other side, a stranger. A silent, grieving, half-broken man who had watched her from a window for 2 years and offered her a wall and no more. It should have frightened her more than Croom. It did not. She turned it over and could not make it frighten her. He had lied about nothing. He had promised nothing he did not mean. He had not once, in all his careful, terrible honesty, tried to make it prettier than it was. A man who would not flatter her into a cage was already, whatever else he was, not Croom. And there was the other thing. The thing she made herself look at last, because it was the least sensible, and therefore the most important. When he had said, "You have always come anyway," something in her that had been cold for 4 years had turned toward it like a plant toward a window. She thought of the yard, and the window, and the tall shape behind the glass on the black mornings. Someone in the world had known she was there. It had not been nothing. She had told herself it was nothing, for 2 winters, and it had not been nothing at all. Toward 3 she stopped weighing it, and simply knew it, the way you finally know you are cold, or tired, or in love, long after the fact has been true. She would marry him. Not to be rescued. She had had enough of being disposed of. She would marry him because between the 2 roads open to her, she chose this one, with her eyes open, of her own will, the first thing in 4 years that was wholly her own to choose. In the morning, she fed the hens. The window was open. The tall shape stood behind the glass. She looked up, full and steady, across the cold light. And this time, deliberately, so there could be no mistaking it, she inclined her head to him. Yes. 3 floors up, she saw the shape go very still. Then, slowly, the Duke raised one hand and laid it flat against the glass. Not a wave. Something quieter and much larger. A hand against the cold barrier that had stood between them for 2 years, on the day it began to come down. Hesper bent for the last of the grain, and her eyes were stinging, and she told herself it was the frost. They were married 11 days later, in the small, cold church at Fenknall, by special license, with the shortest notice decency allowed. It was not a wedding anyone would put in a book. The dowager attended, upright in violet grey, watching her grandson with an expression that fought between triumph and terror. Hobley attended, and Mrs. Sturge, and Thomas the gardener, with his hat crushed to his chest, and a scattering of tenants who had heard the impossible news and come to see if it was true. Hesper wore her one good gown, dyed twice, and a length of old Honiton lace the dowager had pressed on her that morning, with a fierceness that forbade refusal. The Duke spoke his vows in a low, even voice that did not shake. Hesper spoke hers the same. When it came to the ring, his hand was cold, and so was hers, and neither of them minded. There was no wedding breakfast to speak of, no dancing, no crowd. Outside, the November sky hung low over the mere, and somewhere across the park, a dog barked twice and fell silent. At the church door, he offered her his arm, and she took it, and it was the first time they had ever touched. Neither of them said anything about that. They walked back to the great house together, the new Duke and Duchess of Kelvinridge, 2 near strangers bound now past any undoing, and the whole strange transaction was done. She wrote to Mr. Pell that evening. It was a short letter, and she took a cold pleasure in the writing of it that she was not proud of, and did not regret. She informed her guardian that she had married. She informed him of the name and rank of the gentleman she had married. She informed him that she would be obliged if he would forward the particulars of her portion to his Grace's man of business at his earliest convenience. She did not thank him for his care. She signed herself, for the first and last time, Hesper, Duchess of Kelvinridge, and she pressed the seal down harder than she needed to. The reply, when it came a week later, was a small masterpiece of a frightened man arranging his face. Mr. Pell was delighted. Mr. Pell had always known his ward was destined for great things. Mr. Pell hoped her Grace would not forget, in her elevation, the humble roof that had sheltered her, and remained her most devoted, most obedient, and so on. Mr. Croom was not mentioned. Mr. Croom, Hesper gathered, had been quietly and permanently dropped, as one drops a card that has become worthless. She felt a moment's grim pity for whatever other girl now stood in her old place on Gay Street. Then she folded the letter away and did not think of Josiah Pell again for a long time. That was the easy part. She had escaped the worst thing. Now she had to learn the strange one. Being Duchess of Kelvinridge, she discovered, was chiefly an education in silence. Fenkenall was a great grave house, and it had shaped itself around its master's grief, the way a tree shapes itself around a wound. The servants moved quietly. Doors were kept closed. Whole rooms had been shut up and shrouded, the west wing chief among them, where the old nurseries were, and where— she learned this slowly from Mrs. Sturge, never from the Duke— the young Lord Kit had had his rooms. No one went there. No one spoke of it. The talking had gone out of the house, as the Dowager had said, like water out of a cracked jug, and no one had ever thought to see whether the crack might be mended. Her husband kept to his study and his own rooms. He did not dine in company. For the first fortnight of her marriage, Hesper saw him almost as little as she had before it, a tall grave figure glimpsed at the end of a gallery, a low voice behind a door. They had married. They were strangers still. She had known it would be so. She had chosen it with her eyes open. And still, some evenings, she felt the strangeness of her life close over her head, like water. She would sit alone at one end of the long, cold dining table. A footman behind her chair, 40 feet of polished mahogany between her and no one. She did not complain. It was not in her to complain of a bargain she had made freely. But she was not made to sit in shrouded rooms and be waited on, and after the first fortnight, she stopped trying to be. She kept the yard. Croom or no Croom, Duchess or no Duchess, she rose before it was light and fed the hens. The first morning she came down in her new fine clothes. One of the maids tried gently to tell her that a duchess did not do such things. Hesper had looked at the girl kindly and gone out to the yard anyway. That had been the end of that. The window opened. The tall shape watched. Some things did not change, because a ring had been put on. Then she went further. She had run a household on nothing in her guardian's house. She could not sit idle in one that had everything. She began quietly to take Fenkenall in hand. She had the shrouds off the morning room, because a person must have one warm, bright room to sit in. She learned the whole book of the household from Mrs. Sturge, who was starved for a mistress and bloomed under one. She shortened the dreadful table. On the 9th evening of her marriage, she gave a quiet order. When the Duke came, as he sometimes did, to take a solitary late supper, he found the vast board reduced to a small round table by the fire. It was laid for one, warm and close and human. He stood in the doorway a long moment, looking at it. "You have changed the table," he said, when she came in to see the fire made up. "I have. I hope you do not mind it." She met his eyes steadily. "That table was built to seat 40. There have not been 40 happy people in this house in a long time. It seemed cruel to keep laying for ghosts." Something moved in his grave face. "No," he said slowly. "I do not mind it." A pause. "Will you sit?" It was the first time he had asked. She sat. A footman laid a second place. They ate a plain supper by the fire, a duke and a duchess who had been married 9 days and never once shared a meal. They did not talk very much. He could not, and she would not press him. But it was not a cold silence. It was the silence of two people learning the shape of each other, careful, unhurried. And when she rose to leave him, he stood and said, "Thank you," in a voice that was not talking about the supper. After that, he came to the small table most evenings. It became, without either of them naming it, theirs. He did not find words easily. She understood that now as a fact of him, like his height or the grey of his eyes, and she stopped waiting for the man the rumours had invented and made her peace with the man who was there. He spoke in short, careful sentences with long silences between, and she learned to read the silences, which said as much as the sentences. She learned that he was not cold. He was the opposite of cold. He was a man who felt too much, and had walled it up because the last time he let it out, it had cost him more than he could pay. She did not know yet what the cost had been. She did not ask. She had walls of her own, and she knew what it was to have someone try to climb them uninvited. But the wall came down, a stone at a time, over that first long winter, in the small warm room, at the small warm table. She told him about her father, the Beatles, and the forgotten rent, the great, gentle, ruinous mind of him. She made him almost laugh. Once, describing the day her father had sold the last of the good silver to buy a case of tropical moths, and been genuinely bewildered by her distress. The almost laugh was a remarkable thing on that grave face, a crack of warmth, quickly gone, and she found she would have sold a good deal of silver herself to see it again. He told her almost nothing of himself at first, but he began slowly to ask. He asked about the yard. He asked one night why she named none of the hens. She told him, "You do not name what you may have to kill." He was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "That is a very hard rule." "It is a very hard yard," she said. He looked at her across the little table with those clear grey eyes, as though she had said something that went straight through him. She had. She did not know it yet, but she had. The mornings went on. The window opened. The shape watched. She fed the hens and inclined her head, and it became a language between them, wordless, older now than their marriage. Some mornings, when the weather was very bad, she would look up and find the window empty. Then, a few minutes later, the yard gate would open. He would come out himself, in a greatcoat with the collar up. He would stand a little apart and watch her work, his breath smoking in the cold. He never offered to help. She never asked. It was not that kind of watching. He simply stood, as though the sight of a living thing doing a living task in the grey light was something he needed, the way a man coming out of a long fever needs plain bread. One such morning, a hard white one in January, He spoke into the quiet without looking at her. "He kept hens," the Duke said. "My brother, when we were boys." Hesper went very still, the scoop halfway to the trough. She did not turn. She had learned that he could say the hardest things only sideways, only to the middle distance, only if she did not look at him while he said them. "Did he?" she said, low. This yard was his. His voice was even, but she heard the cost of every word. He was mad for it. Eggs, breeds, the incubating of them under a lamp in the nursery until nurse threatened to give notice. He kept a book of them all with their names. A silence. He named everyone. He would have thought your rule a very cruel one. "Perhaps," Hesper said, still not turning, her heart in her throat. "Or perhaps he had a softer yard than mine. Perhaps he did." The frost smoked between them. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, gone lower, and she understood that they had come sideways to the edge of the thing. "When he died, I could not have it cleared. I gave the order to have the whole yard levelled, and I could not make my mouth say it. So it ran wild. 2 years it ran wild, and I could not look at it, and could not be rid of it. And then you came." He stopped. She heard him breathe. "You came, and you did not know whose it was, and you mended it. You put it back together with your own hands as though it were only a yard, because to you it was only a yard. And I stood at that window and watched you do it, morning after morning. And I did not know whether I hated you for it, or whether you were the only thing keeping me alive." Hesper set the scoop down slowly in the frost. Now, at last, she turned. He was standing with his back half to her, his grey eyes fixed on the mere. There were no tears on his face. She understood this was a man who had gone long past the country, where tears still came easily, but he was white to the lips, and his hands were shut at his sides, and he had said more in a poultry yard on a January morning than he had said to any living soul in 2 years. "Everett," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. She had not planned it. It came out of her of its own weight, low and steady, and she saw it land on him like a hand laid flat on his chest. He turned. Their eyes met across the cold, bright yard, and something passed between them that had no words in it at all, that needed none, that was truer than any vow they had spoken in the cold church. "I am glad the yard was his," she said. "I am glad I kept it without knowing. If I had known, I would have been careful with it, and careful is not what a yard wants. It wants living in." She held his gaze. "He's not gone from it. Whatever it cost you to watch, he's not gone from a place that is still full of the thing he loved. That is not nothing. That is very far from nothing." The Duke looked at her for a long, long moment. Then he did a thing he had not done in 2 years. He crossed the yard, and he bent, and he took up the scoop she had set down, and he scattered a handful of grain wide, the way she had taught him without teaching him, so the weak ones would eat. His hand was not quite steady. The hens came to him without fear. They stood together in the yard, the Duke and Duchess of Kelvinridge, feeding his dead brother's hens in the hard January light. Neither of them said anything more. There was nothing more that needed saying. Everything that mattered had already been said. That was the first peak of the winter. She thought afterwards that if the world had let them alone, they might have gone on climbing quietly toward each other for the rest of their lives. But the world does not let people alone. And the world, that spring, arrived in two shapes at once: a letter from a frightened friend, and a beautiful cousin who had waited 10 years to be Duchess of Kelvinridge, and did not mean to lose the title to a girl who fed hens. The letter came first. It was March, and the thaw was on the mere, and Hesper had begun, cautiously, to be happy, which is always when the letters come. It was addressed in a hand she knew, cramped and careful, the hand of the one friend she had made in the cold years at Bath. Frances Dyer had been governess to the family, 2 doors down from Mr. Pell's, a small, brave, shabby young woman who had shared her fire and her books and her few coins with a lonely girl who had nothing, and asked nothing back. When the Dowager carried Hesper off to Fenkenall, Frances was the only thing in Bath she had been sorry to leave. They had written, twice a year, the small, faithful letters of women who cannot afford to write oftener. This letter was not small. Hesper read it standing in the morning room, and the colour went out of her face. Frances had left the family at Bath. She had taken a new place, a better one, or so it had seemed, governess to the children of a Mr. Latchford in London, a widower of good fortune. The situation had gone very wrong. The letter did not say everything. Frances was too proud and too frightened to set it all down. But Hesper could read the shape of it between the careful lines. Mr. Latchford had made Frances an offer that was not marriage. When she refused him, he had turned. Now he meant to dismiss her without a character. Worse, he had begun to say things, that she had thrown herself at him, that she was not a fit person to have the teaching of children, that her conduct had been such that no respectable house could take her. In a month, Frances Dyer would be on the London street without a reference, without a shilling, with her name poisoned in advance in every house that might have employed her. She had no family living. She had, she wrote, no one else in the world she dared to ask. She was ashamed to ask even Hesper. She would understand entirely if her Grace, in her new position, could not be seen to know a ruined governess. She only did not know what else to do. Hesper folded the letter with hands that were not quite steady. She knew exactly what a woman in Frances's position faced. She had stood one doorway away from it herself. She knew that a governess dismissed without a character had 2 roads, and that both of them ended badly. The difference between Frances Dyer and Hesper Whitgrove was nothing on earth but luck. An old woman's whim on a visit to Bath. A duke's eyes at a window. It could as easily have been her. It had very nearly been her. She went to find her husband. She found him in the study. She was allowed there now, the one person in the house who was. And she told him plainly, holding nothing back, because holding things back was not the marriage they had. She told him about Frances, the fire shared in the cold years, the offer refused, the ruin coming. She told him she meant to help her. Everett listened in his grave, silent way to the end. Then he said, "How much does she need?" "It is not only money." Hesper pressed her hands together. "Money she needs, yes. But a woman turned off without a character cannot simply be given a purse. She needs a place, a respectable place, or the means to be respectable elsewhere. She needs someone to stand behind her name, or she has no name left to stand behind." She looked at him. "I mean to go to London, to bring her out of that house before Latchford can turn her into the street, and to see her settled somewhere he cannot reach with his lies. I will not do it against your wish. but I am asking you not to wish against it." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him. She saw the fear cross his face, the old fear, the one she had not yet found the root of. The fear of a door closing, of someone he cared for going out and not coming back. He mastered it. She saw him master it, and loved him for the effort of it, though she did not yet let herself call it love. "I do not like London," he said at last. It was, she understood, an enormous confession. "I cannot go with you. I could not be of use to you there. I would be a weight." A pause. "But you must go. She is yours to help, and you are right, and I will not be a man who kept his wife from doing a decent thing because he was afraid of a city." He looked at her. "Take Hobley. Take the London house. It is shut, but it can be opened in a day. Take whatever money you need and do not count it. And Hesper," his grey eyes held hers. "Come back." "I will come back," she said. "I always come back. You of all people know that." Something eased in his face. "Yes," he said. "I do." She went to London 3 days later. She had not meant it to become a scandal. Looking back, she could never quite find the point at which a decent errand had turned into a weapon in someone else's hand. But that was the nature of the thing. Scandal did not need truth. It needed only a woman doing something that could be described 2 ways, and someone with a reason to choose the worse description. London in the season was a machine for watching. Hesper had forgotten that in her year of grey mornings and hens. The moment the shutters came off the Kelvinridge house in town, the moment a footman in the Duke's livery was seen on the step, the machine turned its eye. The silent Duke's mysterious new Duchess, the nobody he had married in a country church with no notice, had come to town without him, alone. That alone was enough to start the fans going. And Hesper, intent on Francis, hardly noticed the eye at all, which was the worst thing she could have done. She went to the Latchford house herself. She should perhaps have sent Hobley, but she did not know the streets, and she did not trust the errand to anyone else. Under the fine clothes, she was still a woman who did her own hard tasks with her own hands. She was seen going in, a duchess, alone, calling at the house of a widower of bad reputation, staying above an hour. She came out with Francis Dyer, pale and weeping, and took her up into the ducal carriage in the open street. And that was seen too. Over the following week, she installed Francis in respectable lodgings, found her a physician when the poor woman collapsed with the strain of it, and set Hobley to work finding her a new situation far from London and Mr. Latchford's poison. All of it decent. All of it, from the outside, capable of a second reading. And there was someone in London that season very willing to give it one. Lady Genevieve had come up for the season, as she came every year, and this year she had come up angry. She had waited a long time to be Duchess of Kelvinridge. She had been raised to it, more or less. Her mother, the Duke's aunt, had planted the idea in her when she was a child. The whole slow decline of the Brackworth fortunes had made it, over the years, less a hope than a plan. Genevieve's father, the Earl, was quietly ruined. The house in town was let. Her portion had been spent twice over on seasons that had not answered. She was 26, beautiful, running out of time. She had told herself, through 2 years of the Duke's mad seclusion, that he would come out of it in the end. And when he did, there she would be, the obvious, the inevitable, the suitable choice. It would all come right. Instead, he had come out of it to marry a companion who who fed hens. A nobody. A Somerset naturalist's penniless daughter with dyed gowns and dirt under her nails. Genevieve had received the news in January and been ill with it, genuinely ill, the way you are ill when the one plan your whole life has been built around is taken away in a single sentence. She was not, whatever the servants' hall came to say of her, a wicked woman. That was what made it sad. She was a frightened one. She was a woman who had been given nothing but her face and the promise of a title, had staked everything on the title, and had just watched it walk into a country church on another woman's finger. Behind her cruelty, had anyone looked, was pure terror, of poverty, of spinsterhood, of the genteel, slow drowning that waited for a beautiful ruined earl's daughter, with no husband and no fortune, and no plan left. She did not set out to destroy Hesper Whitgrove out of malice. She set out to destroy her because Hesper had, without knowing it, taken the last solid ground from under Genevieve's feet, and a drowning person will pull down anyone within reach. She saw the Duchess go into the Latchford house. She had, in fact, made it her business to know where the Duchess went. And she looked at what she saw, and she chose deliberately the worse reading, and she began very softly to tell it. She did it beautifully. She never said a hard word. That was the art of it. She let the fans do the work. Poor thing. Do you know her at all? No, no one does. That is rather the point. They say she has come up without him, in the season, and calling at, well, at the Latchford house, of all houses. One does not like to say. Latchford. But he is quite, yes, quite. And she was there above an hour, my dear, in the open street, and came out with some young person. A companion, they say, or so she calls her. Ah, yes. Ah. And so on, the poison going out into the season drop by drop, never traceable to the hand that poured it. Within a fortnight, the whole of fashionable London had a story about the Duchess of Kelvinridge. The story was not the true one. The true one was that a brave woman had rescued a friend. The season had no use for that. The season wanted the other thing, the delicious thing, the fall of the nobody who had reached above her station. And Lady Genevieve, drowning, gave it to them with both hands. Hesper knew none of it. She got Francis settled at last, in a good, quiet family in Yorkshire, 4 counties from Mr. Latchford, with a character written in the Duke's own hand that no widower's spite could touch. She saw her friend onto the northern coach, her health mending, her name safe. She stood in the London street and watched the coach out of sight. She felt the deep, clean satisfaction of a hard thing done right. Then she went home to Shropshire, to Fenknoll, to her hens and her husband and her small warm table, with no idea at all that she carried the season's poison home with her, folded invisibly into her fine new clothes. The poison reached Fenknoll before she did. That was the way of such things. It went by the fast post, in the letters of well-meaning acquaintances and ill-meaning ones. It was waiting in the house when the Duchess's carriage came up the drive on a soft April evening. She came home tired and glad and entirely unprepared. She found her husband changed. It was not anything he said. He said almost nothing. That was the point. That was the terror of it. She had spent a winter learning to read his silences, and she came home to a silence she could not read, a shut, cold silence, the old one, the one from before. He met her in the hall. He was courteous. He asked after her journey. He asked after Francis, and heard the answer, and said it was well done, in a voice with nothing behind it. And then he withdrew to his study, and the door closed. Hesper stood in the hall of her own house with the strangest cold feeling. She had come back to Fenknoll and found the Duke of 2 years ago waiting in her husband's clothes. She went to the dowager. The old woman was by her fire, and she was angry. Hesper saw at once, but not at her. Tabitha's thin hands were shaking on her cane, and her pale eyes were bright with a fury that had nowhere useful to go. "Sit down, child," she said. "You do not know, and you must be told. And better by me than by that fool of a man shutting himself in his study like a wounded animal." Her voice cracked with the effort of it. "There is a story going round the county. It came up from London while you were gone. It is a lie, and I know it is a lie, and any creature with sense knows it is a lie. But it is a very good lie, and it has done its work, and it has done its work chiefly on Everett, because Everett is the one man in England least able to withstand it." She told her. She told it plainly. The Latchford house, the open street, the companion, the fans, the whole of the season's slow poison. She told her the shape it had taken by the time it reached Shropshire, that the Duchess of Kelvinridge had gone up to London the moment her husband's back was turned, that she had been seen where no honest woman goes, that she had brought home some story of a friend to cover it. Hesper listened, and the blood came up hot in her face, not with shame, but with rage, a clean, scalding rage on her own behalf, and Francis's both. "It is a lie," she said, "every word of it. I went for Francis. You know I went for Francis. He knows it. He gave me the money and the carriage, and wrote her character with his own hand." "I know it," said the dowager. "Of course I know it. Listen to me." She leaned forward, and her old face was terrible with love and fear. "It is not the lie that is the danger, child. Everett does not believe the lie. Do not make the mistake of thinking he believes it. He is not that kind of fool." She paused, and her voice dropped. "The danger is worse than belief. The danger is that you went away, and you came back. While you were gone, he had 4 weeks of an empty house and a whispering county. 4 weeks to remind him of the one thing he has organized his whole broken life around never risking again." Her hand tightened. "He let himself care for you. Do you understand? For 2 years he cared for nothing living. The last time he loved someone, he lost him behind a closed door, and he swore he would never stand in that particular fire again. And then you came. You mended the yard. You sat at his table. You called him by his name, and he let the door of himself come open a crack. And the instant it was open, the world reached in and showed him exactly what he was afraid of, that he could be made a fool of, that the thing he loved could go out into the world and come back carrying ruin. That caring costs, and the bill always comes." The old woman sat back, spent. "He's not angry with you, Hesper. He's terrified of you, and a terrified man behind a closed door is the hardest thing in the world to reach. I know. I have been trying to reach that particular man for 2 years." Hesper sat very still by the fire, and she understood, and the understanding was worse than anger would have been. "What was the closed door?" she asked at last, quietly. "You have said it twice. The last time he loved someone, he lost him behind a closed door. His brother, Kit." She met the old woman's eyes. "I know the yard was Kit's. He told me that himself in January, and it cost him everything to tell it. But there is more. There has always been more, under everything, and no one in this house will say it. And I think perhaps it is time someone did. I think perhaps I cannot reach my husband until I know exactly what door I am standing outside of. The dowager looked at her for a long time. The fire settled. Somewhere in the great house a clock struck, small and far. "No," the old woman said at last, and there was something almost like relief in it, the relief of a burden about to be set down. "No, you cannot, and I will not tell you." She held up a hand against Hesper's protest. "I will not tell you, because it is not my grief to give away, and because if you learn it from me, it will be a fact, and if you learn it from him, it will be a healing. There is a difference, child, and it is the whole difference." Her pale eyes were steady. "But I will tell you where the door is. Then it is between you and him, as it should have been from the first. God help you both, for I am too old and too near the end of my own road to do it for you." She drew a slow breath. "Ask him about the night Kit died. Not how he died. Everyone knows how he died. A fever after a wetting. A common enough thing that kills 100 young men a year. Ask him about the night. Ask him what was said. Ask him, Hesper, about the last thing he said to his brother. And then do not, whatever you do, let him close the door again before he has finished answering. That is all I can give you. It is more than I have given anyone in 2 years." Hesper rose. She kissed the old woman's dry cheek, which she had never done before, and the dowager gripped her hand hard for a moment, fierce and wordless, and let her go. She did not go to him that night. She was wise enough for that. A man in the old cold silence could not be stormed. She had learned the grammar of him too well to try it. She waited. She waited 3 days. 3 days in which he did not come to the small table. 3 days in which the window over the yard stayed shut in the mornings. The house drew back into its old shape around its master's fear, and Hesper Whitgrove felt her brief happiness sliding away from her like the thaw off the mere. She fed the hens alone each morning. She looked up each morning at the closed shutter. And she did not despair, because despair was a luxury she had never been able to afford. But she came near it those 3 grey days, nearer than she let anyone see. On the 4th day, she stopped waiting. She went to the study in the evening, when she knew he would be there, and she did not knock. She went in. He was at the window, of course, his back to the room, a tall, dark shape against the last of the light, and he did not turn. "You should not be here," he said. His voice was flat, exhausted, walled. "It is late. Leave me." "No," said Hesper. She shut the door behind her. She stood with her back against it, so that the one door in the room was closed, and she was on the inside of it with him. There was no going out that did not go past her. "I have been 3 days waiting for you to come out," she said, low and steady. "You will not come out. I understand why now. So I am coming in instead, and I am not leaving this room until you have told me the thing this whole house has been built around not saying." She saw his shoulders go rigid. She went on, gentle and relentless, the way you scatter grain wide, so the weak ones can eat. "Everett, tell me about the night Kit died. Tell me what was said. Tell me the last thing you said to your brother." The silence that came then was the worst she had ever stood inside. It went on so long, she thought he would not break it, that he would simply stand at the glass and outlast her. that she had misjudged the whole grammar of him, and lost. She held her ground. She had fed hens in the black cold for 2 winters. She could stand in a silent room as long as it took. And at last, at the very last, with his back still to her, and his face still to the dark glass, the Duke began to speak. "We quarrelled," he said. The word dropped into the room like a stone into the mere. She did not move. She did not make a sound. She let the ripples widen. He was 22, my age when I came into the title, near enough. He wanted a commission. He had wanted it for years. The army, a red coat, a war to be a hero in. I would not buy it for him. His voice was terribly even, the evenness of a man walking a knife's edge over a drop. Our father was dead. Our mother was dead. There was only Kit and me left of the whole family, the 2 of us in this great house. I could not, I would not. I had already put everyone I loved into the ground, Hesper. He wanted me to buy him a commission so that he could go and stand in front of French guns, and I said no. I said no every way a man can say it. That last night we quarrelled, worse than we had ever quarrelled, here, in this room. And he said, the even voice cracked once and steadied. He said I did not want a brother. He said I wanted a possession that would stay where I put it. He said I had grown so afraid of losing things that I had stopped letting them live. And I said, he stopped. Hesper waited. The room was black now, the light all gone, and she could see only the shape of him against the window, rigid, alone. "Tell me," she said, very softly. "Say it. It has been in this house for 2 years. Let it out." "I told him to go, then," Everett said. "I told him if he thought so little of the home that had kept him and the brother that had raised him, he was welcome to it. I told him to get out of my sight. Those were the words. Get out of my sight. And he did. A long breath, shaking now. He walked out of that door. It was November. There was a storm coming off the hills, and he was too angry to wait for it to pass, too angry to take the carriage or do any sensible thing. He took a horse and rode out into it, to spite me, to show me he could go where he liked. He was gone 2 nights. When they brought him back, he was soaked to the skin and grey with cold. The fever took him within the week, and he was never clear enough again, at the end, for me to... The voice broke entirely then, not into tears, into silence. The worst silence, the true one, the one the whole house had been built around. Hesper crossed the dark room to him at last, and stood at his shoulder, not touching him yet, close enough that he could feel her there. "The last thing I said to my brother," Everett said into the glass, in a whisper. "The last thing I ever said to the last person left alive that I loved was, get out of my sight. And he did. And he died of it. I have not been able to say a single word since that I did not weigh 3 times over. I said one thing in anger to Kit, and it killed him. I have been so afraid ever since of what a word can do that I stopped saying any that mattered at all." He turned, finally, in the dark, and she could just see the ruin of his face. "And then you came. You made me want to speak. You sat at that table, and you called me by my name. You made me want to open the door again. And the moment I did, London reached in and showed me what happens when I care. It comes back carrying ruin. It always comes back carrying ruin. I cannot—" "Stop," said Hesper. She said it gently, but it was a command, and it stopped him. "You have carried this 2 years," she said, "and you have carried it wrong. I am going to tell you how. You are going to stand here in the dark and hear me, because I have earned the right to be heard in this room." She took his cold hands in both of hers. He did not pull away. "You did not kill your brother. Listen to me. A fever killed your brother. A storm and a wetting and a fever that kills 100 young men a year killed your brother. Not a sentence. Not get out of my sight. You have made yourself God, Everett, these 2 years. You have decided that your word had the power of life and death over another grown man, that you spoke and he died because you spoke. That is not grief. That is pride wearing grief's coat. You are not that powerful. No one is. He rode into a storm because he was young and angry and stubborn. It was the same boy who named every hen, who wanted a red coat, who thought his brother a fortress instead of a frightened man. He would have ridden into that storm over any quarrel. It was not the words. It was the storm. The words only broke your heart. They did not have the power to break his life. He was shaking now, silently, his cold hands gripping hers. "And there is this," she went on, relentless, gentle. "You have punished yourself for 2 years by going silent. You told yourself a word can kill, so you stopped saying any that mattered. But Everett, think. Whose voice have you been silencing? Not your own only. His. Kit's. He was the one who talked, your grandmother told me. He talked enough for the 2 of you. When he died, you took the talking out of this house as a penance, and in doing it, you buried him twice. You shut up his yard. You shut up his voice. You made this whole great house a tomb for a boy who loved noise and hens and red coats and life. That is not honoring him. That is not grief. That is the loudest thing you could possibly have done, dressed up as silence, and it has dishonored the memory of a laughing boy every single day for 2 years. She gripped his hands harder. You want to make it right with Kit? Then live. Then talk. Then let his yard be full of hens, and his house be full of voices, and his brother be a man again instead of a ghost at a window. That is the amends. Not silence. Never silence. Silence is the one thing that boy would not have forgiven you. The Duke made a sound then, low and broken, that was not quite a word. He bent his head. Hesper drew him down and held him, this tall, grave, silent man, held him in the dark study over his brother's yard. She felt at last the thing in him break that had needed 2 years to break. It broke clean. He wept. It was not graceful, and it was not brief. She held him through all of it, and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Everything that had needed saying had been said. Outside the storm of him passed, the way the November storm had passed, and left the world washed and quiet. When at last he lifted his head, the worst of 2 years had gone out of his face, and something young and ruined and alive had come back into it. "The London thing?" he said, hoarse, his hands still in hers. "I never believed it. You must know I never believed it. I knew what you had gone for. I knew what you are." His grey eyes searched her face. "It was not the lie. It was that you had gone at all, and come back, and I was so afraid of how much I—" He stopped, and then, a man who had not said a word that mattered in 2 years, he made himself say the one that mattered most. "How much I love you," Everett said. "There, I have said it. It did not kill anyone. You were right. You are always right. It is unbearable in a wife." And Hesper Whitgrove laughed, a wet, cracked laugh in the dark. "I will try to be wrong occasionally, for your comfort," she said. Then she stopped laughing, because he had drawn her in. There in the study, over the yard, past every wall and every silence, the Duke and Duchess of Kelvinridge kissed each other for the first time. Not as a bargain, not as a rescue, as two people who had chosen, with their eyes open, to stop being afraid. The scandal did not survive them. Scandals rarely survive the truth when the truth finally decides to stand up. The Duke did a thing, that spring, that the county talked of for a decade, though not in the way Lady Genevieve had intended anything to be talked of. Everett, Duke of Kelvinridge, who had not been seen in a public room in 2 years, put on his good coat and went into the world. He took his wife to the county assembly at Aldermere, the same rooms where she had once stood invisible behind an old woman's chair. He walked in with the Duchess of Kelvinridge on his arm, in front of the whole staring county, and he did not leave her side. He spoke, carefully, sparely, in his low, grave way. But he spoke. He spoke to anyone who came near, of his wife, of the friend she had rescued in London at his own request and expense, of the Yorkshire family, who now blessed her name. He spoke of Mr. Latchford, whom he named without heat and ruined without effort. A duke who chooses to speak plainly about a man is a very great deal more powerful than a beautiful woman whispering behind a fan. The story turned inside out in a single evening. By the end of the night, the season's delicious tale of the fallen, nobody had become a different tale entirely. It was the tale of a great grieving duke brought back to life by a woman of such quality that he had walked out of 2 years of mourning to stand beside her. The county, which loves a fall, discovered it loved a resurrection even better. Lady Genevieve was there. She had to be. To stay away would have confirmed everything. She stood by the fireplace where she had always stood, beautiful, brittle, and watched the thing she had built come down around her. And there was no triumph anywhere in the room for Hesper in the watching of it. Only that old useless pity, sharper now. She found Genevieve alone, late in the evening, in the cold anteroom off the ballroom, and it was not an accident that she found her. Hesper had gone looking. "You have won," Genevieve said, without turning. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "You need not have come to see it. I am aware that you have won." "I did not come to see anything," Hesper said. "I came to tell you that I know why you did it." Genevieve turned then, her chin up, her eyes bright and hard and frightened. "You know nothing about me." "I know you are 26, Hesper said quietly. "I know your father is ruined, the house in town is let, your portion is gone. You have been raised your whole life to be one thing, and you are running out of years to be it. I know that when a woman has nothing but her face and a promise, and the promise is taken away, she will do a great deal to get it back. I know all of that, Lady Genevieve, because 2 years ago I was one old woman's whim away from being exactly where you are standing. I have no fortune of my own. I have £400 I cannot touch, and a great deal of Latin. The only thing between me and your position is luck. I have never once forgotten it. I am not going to start forgetting it tonight." Genevieve's face had gone very white. "Then you have come to gloat." "I have come to make you an offer," Hesper said. "You will hate me for it. I would rather you hated me warm and fed than pitied yourself cold and ruined." She held the other woman's furious, frightened gaze. "My husband has the living of Brackworth's mortgages, or can have them, with a word to his man of business. That word can be a hard one, or a soft one. It will be a soft one. Your father's affairs can be quietly eased. No one need know from where. And you have a cousin in the north, I am told, a widow of good estate, who has wanted a companion of family this 12-month, and could not find one who would not condescend to her. It is not London. It is not a title. It is a decent house and a decent income, and a way out of the water you are drowning in. I can arrange it by Michaelmas. She paused. That is my offer. You may spit on it if you like. But you are drowning, Lady Genevieve, and I have been in that water, and I find I cannot stand on the bank and watch whatever you have done to me. It is a fault in me. My husband has the same one. It is why we suit. Genevieve stared at her. For a long moment, her beautiful face worked, fury and terror and shame and a wild, ungovernable relief all fighting in it at once. Then, to her own evident horror, she began to cry. Not prettily, not for effect. They were the ugly, wrenching tears of a proud, frightened woman who has been shown mercy by the one person on earth with the most reason to withhold it. Why? She managed. Why would you? Because it could have been me, said Hesper simply. Because it was very nearly me. That is the only reason there is, and it is enough. She left her there. She did not tell Everett all of it, only enough. The Brackworth mortgages were quietly eased that summer. Lady Genevieve went north to her widowed cousin at Michaelmas. She made, by all accounts, a rather good companion. Once there was food on the table, and a roof that was her own, and no promise left to break. If she never quite forgave Hesper for the rescue, she never told the story again either, and in time the county forgot it had ever been told. Her defeat, when Hesper thought of it, never felt like a victory. It felt like what it was. A frightened woman pulled out of the water by the one hand she had tried hardest to bite. There was no triumph in it. There was only the plain, sad decency of the thing, which was all the triumph Hesper had ever wanted. The rest of the story is quieter, as the best of any story is. Everett did not become a talkative man. That was never in him, and Hesper would not have wanted it. She had married a man of silences, and learned their grammar, and loved them. But he became a man who said the things that mattered. He said them slowly and rarely, and they were worth waiting for. He dined at the small table every night. He walked into the yard most mornings and fed the hens beside his wife, and the county, which had thought him mad, decided instead that he was merely eccentric, which in a duke is the same as being admired. They opened the west wing that summer, together. They took the shrouds off Kit's rooms and let the light in. Hesper found the book, the one Everett had told her of, the Book of Hens, with everyone named in a boy's untidy hand. She did not weep over it, and neither did he. They read it together by the window, laughing at the names. A hen called Bonaparte, a cockerel called the Archbishop. It was the first time Kit's name had been spoken in that house, without the whole house flinching. After that it grew easier, until the boy was a presence in the place again instead of an absence, a laughing ghost who had loved noise, restored at last to a house that had learned to make some. The dowager lived to see it. She lived to see the wing opened and the table full, and her grandson returned to the world. She was fierce and sharp and impossible to the very end, which came gently the following spring, in her sleep, by her own fire. An old woman who had done the last great work of her life, and knew it. Her death was the one grief the happiness could not undo, and Hesper did not try to undo it, only carried it, the way she carried all the hard, true things, without complaint. Tabitha had reached across 2 lonely lives and joined them with her own worn hands, and she had lived exactly long enough to see them hold. There are worse ways for a long life to end. They named their first child for her. She was born the next winter, in the hard, bright cold. A small, furious, dark-eyed girl who came into the world bellowing, as though she meant to make up all at once for the years of silence in that house. They christened her Tabitha, for the old woman who had made the whole of it possible. The county came to the christening in its numbers, because a duke's heir is a duke's heir even when it is a daughter. And they came because the story of Kelvinridge had become, by then, the story the county liked best to tell about itself. It was the tale of the silent duke and the girl who fed his hens, and how she had brought him back from the dead, one grey morning at a time. On a morning in her 3rd spring of marriage, Hesper Whitgrove rose before it was light, as she always did, and went down through the sleeping house to the yard. It was the same yard, the same leaning apple tree, the same coop her hands had mended, the same low, glad racket of hens who had heard her before they saw her. The frost smoked off the roof. A heron went up over the mere on slow grey wings. She scattered the grain wide, so the weak ones would eat. But it was not the same at all, and she knew it, and the knowing was the whole of her happiness. She did not look up at the window. She did not need to. The window was open, and it would stay open now, in all weathers, because the man who had watched her from behind it for 2 years had learned at last to come down. She heard the yard gate. She heard his step on the cobbles. And then Everett was beside her in the grey light, the Duke of Kelvinridge in his old greatcoat, with the collar up. Their daughter lay warm against his shoulder, wrapped in the dowager's violet grey shawl. He had come to feed the hens with his family in the first light of an ordinary day. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He took the scoop from her hand and scattered a fistful of grain, the way she had taught him without teaching him. The hens came to them both without fear. The child on his shoulder made a small delighted sound at the small delighted birds. And the sun came up grey, and rose over the Shropshire hills the way it had come up every morning of her life. Hesper had spent an hour once in a crowded room, learning the exact shape of not being seen. She had told herself it did not matter, that she did not mind, that she had no place in rooms like that, and never would. She had been right about the rooms, and wrong about the mattering. It had mattered terribly. She simply had not known, then, what it would be to stand in a plain, cold yard at first light, and be seen. To be seen wholly, daily, by the one pair of eyes in all the world that had learned her worth before she ever spoke a word. And she had not known what it would be to see him back, just as wholly, just as plainly, across the small distance that was all that was left between them now. Every morning she had fed the hens in the yard, and every day the silent Duke had watched her. Neither of them had known in the beginning that the watching was the whole of a language, or that a language is only ever the beginning of a life. They knew it now. They had the rest of their lives to be fluent in it. She leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, above their sleeping daughter, and watched the hens, and said nothing. Nothing needed saying. The two of them had learned at last the one thing the great silent house had never known. Some silences are not the absence of words at all. They are the deep, contented quiet of people who no longer have anything to fear from each other, standing together in the ordinary light, seen. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end.